that tarnished, it seemeth.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another SAC Reviews, and today we are looking at Elden Ring's DLC expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree. For the PlayStation, Xbox and PC, Shadow of the Erdtree is the brand new DLC expansion for 2022's Game of the Year, Elden Ring. From the developers at From Software, Shadow of the Erdtree takes us on a brand new journey. Guided by Miquella, we are taken to the Land of Shadows, a brand new area which has been obscured by the Erdtree and engulfed in the flames of Mesmere, where we can once again test our might against some of the best and hardest bosses that gaming has to offer. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, only using footage from the beginning of the game and some areas slightly beyond, with minimal boss spoilers, as there are some truly great boss fights and surprises that you should get to enjoy discovering for the first time yourself. And with this being an expansion pack, I'll start off by giving you my quick brief thoughts on the base game of Elden Ring. It was Game of the Year for a reason. As a fan of this genre, I honestly find that FromSoft never misses, so while I may be a bit biased, I will also emphasise that Elden Ring was never my favourite in the Souls series. I'd probably rank the studio's games something like this. But even then, I'd still give Elden Ring a 5 out of 5 because that's just the quality of FromSoft to me. Even the bottom of their pile is better than the crowning jewels of most other studios. Now, to start the DLC, you'll first need to have beaten two bosses in the main game, General Radahn and Mohg the Blood Omen. You can then transport to the Shadowlands by interacting with the cocoon in Mohg's boss arena, and straight away after arriving, this feels special. There really is just something about that first time playing a new Souls game that can't be matched. Even when it's just a new expansion to a 2-year-old game, the sense of excitement and awe, you just can't compete with it. What are the bosses going to be like? The new weapons, environments, that feeling of seeing a boss for the first time, getting your absolute shit kicked in, and then the feeling of utter victory when you finally beat them. When it's brand new and there are no guides online yet, and we're all discovering the secrets of this world together, and placing down messages for our fellow Tarnished to follow, guiding them on their own journeys. Miyazaki said the map is roughly the size of Limgrave, and while, yeah, the map isn't nearly as big as the one in the main game, I feel he's really undersold it with that statement, as this feels noticeably bigger than that opening area of the main game. They take full advantage of the verticality of Elden Ring and give you a surprisingly large amount of variety in locations, all of which feel very natural in their progression, not the usual video gaminess of, okay, so here's the snowy area and right here's the fire area. The world all just flows together very naturally. General difficulty is interesting in this one, as they've tried to tailor-make it to each player's level, something FromSoft has never really done before. The closest I can think of is the boss memory system from Sekiro, and for the most part, I think it works. So while you can still level up normally through Sites of Grace using runes, there are now also 2 new items in the open world to find. You have Scatter Tree Fragments and Revered Spirit Ashes. The tree fragments boost the damage you both output and take, and the Revered Spirit Ashes boost the abilities of summons. Neither of these affect the main game, as it's purely tied to the Shadowlands, but even with these damage negating and boosting upgrades, this game is hard. Most of the regular enemies won't give you too much of a hard time. Some of them will prepare you to cry, but the bosses are absolutely brutal. Even with several tree upgrades, you'll find yourself getting 2 to 3 shot with a lot of them. And while they are a finite resource, if you do find this happening to you, simply go back into the open world, do some exploring, upgrade yourself some more, and come back later. You will notice a big difference once you've reached a certain level of Shadow Blessing. Visually, you know what you're getting in a game like this. From Software have never been innovators of graphic fidelity. They don't make the best looking games on the market or push hardware to its limits, but it still looks damn good. But the real visual comes from the actual design choices they make. Bosses, enemies, locations, weapons and armour. It's all so creative that you don't care that there's games that came out a few years ago that look better. The charm of the imagination is what shines through here. Though performance wise, I did have a lot of pop-in issues in terms of loading the environments regularly on the PS5, mostly after fast travelling and respawning. Everything held up fine during the combat, traversal and actual gameplay, thank God, but the game does need a second or two to load in every time you exit any form of loading screen. Sound design wise, well, this is your standard affair of a Souls game. This might actually be the most atmospheric any of their games have been musically. Normally there's mostly silence in these games in between the bosses when going around the open world. Maybe the odd swell of music here and there, but music in Souls games are usually reserved almost exclusively for safe zones and boss fights, and while it is mostly the same here, in Shadow of the Erdtree I was noticing a lot more in terms of background score here. This is something Elden Ring did as well in the base game, but I found it even more prevalent here in the DLC. As for the boss music though, as always, FromSoft pulls out all of the stops and delivers absolute S-tiers all around. Time after time I died to main story bosses. It wasn't through being underpowered, it wasn't through not having the right setup. I was getting too distracted by just how amazing the score was. And when they're mixed with the epic scale of some of these fights, there's no word that suits it better than an absolute spectacle. Nobody does a boss fight like From Software, and the score is just as important to a good boss as the look and the feel of the actual fight, and these guys have always known that. There's also an array of new weapons to play with, including 8 new weapon types in the DLC, and the devs clearly want you to use them, as both regular and somber smithing stones of every level will drop so regularly you'll start to wonder if it's actually a bug that they're dropping so many, allowing you to easily upgrade any weapon you find to be on par with your already endgame weapon. And much like their other DLCs, the new weapons you can use are so good. It can be a bit intimidating at first having these completely new and different weapons when you're an endgame character at this point with a build that you've got comfortable with, but just remember the resources and runes you need to upgrade them to the max are plentiful in the Shadowlands, and you're only doing yourself a disservice if you don't try out at least a few of them. While I did struggle at first finding something that I enjoyed as much as my dual katanas, I did grow to love the light greatswords, particularly one you get from an early boss remembrance, which quickly became my main weapon of choice throughout the DLC, and I really want to try out a New Game Plus run using the new martial arts weapon as a main. There's honestly barely anything missing from this, with several mainline incredible boss fights, optional boss fights that are just as good, a surprisingly large map with a considerable amount of dungeons to explore, a story which, if you're able to follow being a FromSoft game, is really going to surprise you. New weapons, armour, the new levelling system. After my first playthrough, my only real complaints are, first off, there's no trophies, which isn't really a problem, but as a completionist and a trophy hunter, it's disappointing that I didn't get my dopamine-inducing hit with the sound of to tell me I've won. And then what's actually required to access the DLC is my other complaint, the fact that if you want to play it, you need to pretty much be at the end game of the main game, which is a big ask for replayability when Elden Ring is such a massive game in its own right. I'm not a speedrunner, I'm not a professional at these games, I'm very good, but I'm far from a pro. In preparation for this, I made a new character, and it took me roughly 28 hours to get to the point I needed to be at to unlock the DLC. Now, given that I haven't even played Elden Ring pretty much since it came out, I'm more than confident I can cut several hours off of that time, but still, that's a big ask if you want to replay something, especially just an expansion, even one as good as this, unless you resort to save scumming. All in all, Shadow of the Erdtree is once again an absolute masterclass in the video game space. Even though it's just a DLC, the sheer amount of not just content but quality content is enough to once again make every other developer in the space salty at From Software, just like when the main game came out 2 years ago. I have bought full price games this year that have been less polished and compelling than this with half the content, and much like all of their other games and expansions, I know for a fact I didn't see everything this had to offer in my first playthrough. It's challenging and rewarding. It builds on an already rock-solid foundation and continues to refine FromSoft's already near perfected formula, and much like almost every one of their previous expansion DLCs, this is arguably even better than the base game itself. Where I started this review saying Elden Ring has never really been my favourite FromSoft game, Shadow of the Erdtree might just be my new favourite DLC from them. So having said all of that, it's no surprise that I'm giving Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree a 5 out of 5. Have you played Shadow of the Erdtree yet? If not, why? And if you have, let us know what you thought of it in the comments below. What was your favourite or least favourite boss fight? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.